Hello everybody and welcome back to our Professional Development Webinar Series. Thank you for joining us for our presentation today titled Cultivating Contemplation in Your Parish Through Photography. For those of you who are with us here for the first time, my name is Jared Dees and I'm the Digital Publishing Specialist at Ave Maria Press, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. This webinar is brought to you exclusively by Ave Maria Press in partnership with the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils. Just as a reminder, everyone in our audience is muted today, but you were able to ask questions. And questions may be submitted to our presenter using the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel, which you can see displayed on your screen here. Please take a moment now to find the box for typing questions on your GoToWebinar panel and simply click the send button at the bottom right-hand corner to send your questions to the presenter, and I'll be reading them, as many of those as possible, at the end of the presentation today. I'd also like to note that this webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you tomorrow with links to watch the video on YouTube and Vimeo. So now that we've gone through all the technical stuff, once again, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Christine Valtner-Paintner. Christine is the online abbess of the Abbey of the Arts, a virtual monastery offering classes and resources on contemplative practice and creative expression. She holds a doctorate in Christian spirituality from the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley and earned her professional status as a registered expressive arts consultant and educator from the International Expressive Arts Therapy Association. She's the author of Water, Wind, Earth, and Fire, The Artist's Rule, and her new book, Eyes of the Heart, which is the topic of the presentation today. Christine is a columnist for the Progressive Christian portal at Pathos as well. And she leads retreats and trains spiritual directors and currently is living out her commitment as a Benedictine oblate in Galway, Ireland with her husband. So Christine, thanks again for being with us today.
Thanks, Jared. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm going to hand over controls to you.
Okay. Very exciting.
And there you have it.
Great. Okay. Well, hello, everybody. I'm so delighted to be here with you in this virtual space. I was just marveling with Jared about even though all my work large part of my work is online, I never cease to be amazed at the way that it brings people in connection with one another. So I'm grateful for that, living here in Ireland on the very west coast. And I wanted to start by just giving you a little background of my love of photography. So this is a photo of me sort of giving evidence of my early love. I was fortunate to have grandparents who actually owned a whole chain of photo stores in the Northeast United States. And so when I was growing up, we always had a camera in hand. And this is actually a picture of my grandmother with my aunt. And just to kind of show you how the photography sort of goes back through the family a couple of generations. And this is a photo of my mom taking a picture. And then this is a picture of me. So you can kind of see the sort of the lineage of photography. So I've always had this camera in my hand, and I've always loved photography for what it offers as a way of kind of recording daily experience. But it wasn't really until I discovered monastic tradition, until I really fell in love with the contemplative path, that I began to see photography as a contemplative practice. And it was in my late 20s when I was in graduate school that I began studying Benedictine tradition in particular. And I fell in love with this tradition that I discovered really was how I was already praying in the world. And so it sort of gave this language and form to what was happening. And then I discovered that many of the things I love to do, particularly writing and photography and walking, were all contemplative practices. They were all ways that I could slow down in my life and really pay attention and really see the world differently, and really help develop sort of my work, which is around becoming a monk in the world. Is one of the things I really focus my passion around, helping people become contemplatives in their daily life through a number of practices. and particularly through the creative arts. And so I lead people in writing and visual art and movement, and photography is one of the visual arts practices that I most love as a contemplative practice. And so I live in Galway, Ireland right now. I'm kind of in the middle of a big adventure that my husband and I embarked on about a year ago. And so this is the view from actually from my apartment on a clear day. And so very inspiring. But this is actually the view on most days in Ireland. I used to live in Seattle, and when I moved to Galway, I thought Seattle would have prepared me for the rain of Galway, and Galway takes rain much more seriously than even the Northwest does. So I wanted to pause for a moment before I kind of move into, we're going to start with some meditation and just give a chance to do like a quick little poll. Jared's going to put some questions up on your screen and just get a sense of like how many of you already engage photography as a hobby and how many of you engage photography as a contemplative prayer practice.
Okay, so I just launched the first poll, which is, do you already engage in photography as a hobby? So go ahead and answer that now, if you can. We'll take a few more seconds here to allow you to answer, and then we'll share the responses in a moment. Okay, let's give it about 5 more seconds. Okay, so it looks like we have the responses are about 79% of people say yes, they do currently engage in photography as a hobby, and 21% say no.
Well, that's great.
So the second question is, do you engage in photography as a contemplative prayer practice? And we'll launch that one as well. And you can see there again, you'll have 2 options, yes or no, if you currently use photography as a contemplative prayer practice. Okay, and let's give it about 5 more seconds again. And here are the responses for the second question. And Christine, I don't know if you can see them or not, but it looks like 43% say that they do use photography as a contemplative prayer practice, and 57% say no. That's compared to the 80% of people who said, or about 80% of people who said that they currently do have photography as a hobby. So it's back to your screen now.
Great, thank you. Well, great. Well, that's fun to get a little sense of the group that's participating here. And so I'm just sort of curious about whether people are engaging in photography already. You know, it's such a accessible medium, and so my hope is that for those of you who don't engage photography as this contemplative practice, that today's presentation might open up some new windows, and even if you already do, that there might be some new ways of seeing the potential for this practice. So really the book that I've written is called Eyes of the Heart, and it's really this image that comes from Scripture, that the heart is the center of awareness in biblical tradition. And the sense of the goal of seeing with eyes of the heart is to see everything as holy and sacred. And in monastic, one of the great gifts for me in monastic tradition is that we are really called to see all people, all things, and all time as sacred. And so in the Benedictine rule, for example, we hear the call to hospitality. We hear this call to welcome in the stranger as the face of Christ. And it's one of my favorite lines from the rule, because it's this call to remember that what is most strange in our lives, the people that feel the most strange in our lives, are the very face of God. And Benedict also writes about how the kitchen utensils are to be treated just as the sacred items on the altar. And so this sense that there is no distinction between what is sacred and what is not sacred, that everything is seen as holy. And then even the tradition of praying the hours in monastic practice, this moving through the cycle of the day, the sanctifying of time, the honoring of the energy of rising in the morning and the fullness of midday and the falling of evening, surrendering, and then the dark and stillness of night. And so for me, the invitation of monasticism really has been to see all things as sacred, all people, all things, all time as sacred. And yet that can be challenging to do in our daily lives. And so we really need practices that help us with this. We really need ways to see, to learn to see from our heart rather than seeing from kind of an analytical place, from a place where we're trying to grasp or figure out. And so you can even just take a moment and think about how that energy feels for you physically when I say, you know, when you're trying to look at something to figure it out or to analyze it, as opposed to looking at something to be curious about it, to be open to what gifts it might have for you. And just to notice the difference in those experiences. And that second one is really what seeing with eyes of the heart is about. And so in monastic tradition, we have this great practice of Lectio Divina, which means sacred reading, and there's this contemplative way of reading the scriptures. And so I've adapted, for the photography process, I've adapted Lectio Divina to a practice called Visio Divina, or sacred seeing. And the idea is that in Lectio, what we're really trying to cultivate is an ability to see all things, all experiences as sacred. And so we begin with the scripture text and we hear the voice of God in there, in that place. And slowly, if we practice often enough, that rhythm of Lectio becomes part of our daily lives, so that we start to encounter the world and start to bring this rhythm of the prayer of Lectio to our daily lives. And so we can think about the ways that visual images, or the ways that our eyes meet the world, as encountering sacred text, visual texts in the world. And so the four movements of Lectio, the first movement is this idea of settling into our prayer space, becoming quiet, and then listening for, in a scripture reading, listening for a word that shimmers. But in a visual text or in the world around us, looking to see if there's something in the world around us that is shimmering. And then out of that awareness of noticing if there's something calling to us in the world around us to pay more attention, and then savoring that, savoring what that stirs up in us, like noticing the feelings and the images and the memories that come up for us in response. And then the third movement of Lectio is always this sense of invitation, or this summoning and serving, as I list it here. And so the sense of, out of my experience of noticing what's calling my attention and noticing how that's interacting with my own experience, and then listening for how I'm being called in response in this very moment of my life. How is what I am seeing today calling me to a new response, to a new way of service, to a new awareness? And then the fourth movement of Lectio, or Visio Divina, is always this time of slowing down even further and stilling ourselves and just releasing all of these beautiful thoughts we've been having and just entering into this place of real silence and stillness. And so I'm going to invite you into a little bit of a visual prayer practice here. And I'm putting up a photo on the screen. It's a photo that was received in Vienna, Austria, at Schönbrunn Palace, if any of you have ever been to Vienna, one of my favorite cities. And I'm going to invite you to just take a few minutes right now to breathe, to center yourself, and to have just a little experience of this Visio Divina. Just have a little experience of slowing down right now and of connecting to your own heart and of seeing what you discover when you open your eyes of the heart. And so just taking a few moments to breathe and to begin to draw your breaths more deeply down into your belly. And let your inhale be long and slow. And let your exhale be long and slow. And just recognizing the way that even just slowing down the breath can bring a sense of spaciousness to our bodies, to our hearts, to our minds. And so just noticing if there's any place of holding or tightness in your body. And if there is, seeing if you might bring your breath to that place and just gently release it, or shift in any way that might make you feel more at ease. And then imagining that you're drawing your awareness with your breath from your head, from this place of thinking and analyzing and judging. And imagining that you're drawing it down into your heart. And remembering that heart in biblical tradition is not just the emotional center. It is where our feelings live, but it is a place of thought, it's a place of intuition, a place of experience. And so if you have some trouble with this imagining, you might try putting a hand on your heart and just giving your heart a little rub, just having a physical connection. Sometimes that can give you sort of an embodied sense of what this movement might be like. And if it still feels unnatural, just try not to worry too much about that. See if you can just let be whatever is true for you right now. And then from this heart space, taking another couple of slow, deep breaths. And then letting your eyes just fall gently on this photo in front of you, this image. And just releasing any judgments or expectations or analysis to see if you can let your eyes kind of wander around the landscape of this image, of this photo. And so just begin to notice like the places of light and the places of shadow. Notice the colors in the photo. And just notice the textures. And notice the different symbols and elements that are present. The lampposts, the pillars, the stairs, the ironwork, the space in the shadows. And even imagine for a moment kind of the larger scene that this photo might have come from. Just recognizing that this is just one moment, one image. And as you let your eyes wander around the landscape of this image, just notice if they're drawn to rest somewhere. Notice if there's somewhere on the image that shimmers for you, or you're curious about, or just calls for a little more attention. And just notice what that is for you. And then as you sit with whatever this image, this space, this texture, this color, begin to notice your own inner response. Begin to notice what thoughts come up, what feelings. Make some space for images that arise or memories. And just take like a minute of silence to just hold some space for those images and memories and feelings to arise in you, and to just notice what those are. And then beginning to shift your awareness a little bit, expanding it, and opening up this question of, is there some sense of invitation for me today, this moment, as I interact with this image, and I'm in this space in my life right now, and these images and these memories and feelings are coming up in me? And just take a few moments of silence again to just hold space for the possibility that there is some invitation. Maybe it's just some new awareness. Maybe it's an action. And just holding space for that and noticing what comes up in you. And then taking another long, slow, deep breath, knowing that you may desire more time for this experience, and know that you can come back to whatever is coming up in you a little bit later. And then just letting go of all of those thoughts, all the invitations, the images, the feelings, just letting go of all that for the moment, and just taking a few breaths and resting deeply into stillness, into the presence of God, into the one who does not need us to do anything in this moment to be cherished, to be loved. And so to just rest in that sense of embrace and being held, and just drinking in that gift of stillness for a few moments. And then taking another slow, deep breath. And then just taking one more look at this image. And just seeing if there's anything else new there, or just notice if your eye is drawn to that same spot, just for a moment. And just as a way of honoring this time, this prayer. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the actual practice of contemplative photography and some of the principles that I think are important for us to consider, to hold. And the first one is this idea of seeing as beholding or gazing. I use those images in my book. This idea of bringing a sense of spaciousness to our seeing, bringing an experience of noticing what's actually there before us rather than what we expect to see, bringing a sense of reverence. And so imagining, what is it like to bless what you see with your eyes, with your vision? What would it be like to move through the day with this sense of reverential seeing, so that whatever comes into your gaze, you recognize as a face of the divine, and you maybe make a little bow to it in your imagination. And so this kind of seeing is not to analyze, but to be transformed. It's not a seeing that is trying to grasp at information. So often we move through the day looking at, timetables and charts and things that we're trying to get to the point, trying to get to what we need from whatever it is we're looking at. And yet this kind of seeing in this practice is a completely different kind of seeing. It's one which creates this sense of space and this sense of reverence. And then kind of connected to this is this idea of receiving rather than taking photos. So we use this language of taking photos. It's very widespread. I tend to use it all the time, even though I'm trying consciously to shift my language, because there's this sense of taking. We rush from thing to thing. We don't pause. We don't allow space. We only see what we expect to find. We grasp at the information we need. We see the stereotypes that are foremost in our mind. And so we miss the opportunity to see beyond what we want. And so this sense of taking, I think, taking photos is very much like embedded in a culture where we take what we need. And yet there's a different way that we might approach our practice of photography, which is a sense of receiving. And so what if I go out into the world on a little photographic exploration, a contemplative walk, maybe just in my neighborhood, and I walk without a need to take photos of everything I see, but just holding this awareness of what is shimmering before me, what is calling for more attention in that prayer practice that we just did, and what is the gift that is waiting for me to receive it. And am I paying enough attention, am I present enough that I might receive that gift? And then this idea of process rather than product. My training in the arts is in what's called expressive arts, which is kind of a subfield of therapy, comes out of the art therapy field. And one of the main focuses in expressive arts is this idea that when we're creating art, we're focusing on the process rather than the product, which means that we're not trying to create a beautiful work of art. That's not the goal in basically our art prayer, our art practice as meditation. So when I'm out receiving photos as part of this contemplative practice, I'm more interested in the process itself, in paying attention to what happens to me moment by moment as I interact with the world around me. What are the moments that I notice I start to shut down, or I start to move to judgment, or I want to rush through things? And so this kind of awareness of process can really be this gift of self-awareness. And so this focus on letting go of trying to make something beautiful and instead trying to receive something meaningful. And then this slow journey of discovery. So the contemplative path is nothing if not about slowness and the slow path, and not trying to rush. We're not trying to get anywhere in this practice. That's the beauty of it. We have everything we need right in this moment. And that's the gift of it. And when we stay attuned to the process, it becomes this journey of discovery. And in the Benedictine tradition, there's this great gift of the reminder that always we begin again, that we always are beginners in this spiritual life. And so we're called again and again every time we start to rush or we start to feel judgment or we start to get distracted, that we get to call our attention back to this moment again and again. And so this slide is just an overview of the chapters that are in the book, and I'm going to just go over these really briefly with some images to show you. So there's a lot of ways. We're not going to break this open here in our limited time, but the core of this practice is seeing with the eyes of the heart. But then there are many sort of facets to photography that can help us cultivate this. There's this attention to light. So photography means, writing with light. And so there's this attention to the way light shifts throughout the day and the way light illuminates things. And so different moments the light shifts. And so how do we stay present to that? Shadow is the complement to light. If we didn't have shadow, everything would be basically washed out. And so shadow gives things depth. And so shadow is an important element in our photography as well. Silhouettes are a form of shadow. In addition to shadow and light being sort of the primary tools of creating the image, the other is this idea of framing. Of when we look through our lens, through our viewfinder, we are making choices about how to frame the image. We are making choices about what to exclude, what to include. And this is a practice of visual discernment. And so it's more about just bringing our awareness to that process when we're receiving images. How do I want to focus in? Like in this previous image, this sense of intimacy with the subject that this gift I'm receiving. And as opposed to this image, which is sort of this sense of opening and expansiveness. For me, at least, that was my experience in receiving the images. The gift of color is another of the tools of photography, and paying attention to the way color comes alive in a moment, with the way different colors speak to us. Colors are symbolic in liturgical seasons. There's a lot of meaning to different colors, and they resonate with us in different ways. And similarly, this idea of black and white as kind of revealing the essence of things. And so both of those have gifts of their own. And so paying attention, again, to how these images call to us. Reflections are another way that we might explore photography, explore receiving images in the world. How is the world being mirrored back to us? And in that reflection, what am I seeing in a new way? And we might remember that in some cameras, the mechanism for actually receiving the image is a mirror reflection. And in the medieval mystics, the mirror was this image actually for the soul. And the well-polished mirror was the one who could reflect this kind of divine radiance. And playing with reflections like this image, this building is a building that my husband and I were living in when we lived in Vienna last year. And I loved this contrast between this old historic building and the new modern one on the other side of the street. And sort of this gift that reflection can offer. Another of the chapters talks about self-portraits. And this is a photo of my mom, again, drawing on this tool of mirroring and reflection. How might we use photography as a way of receiving gifts of insight into ourselves, into seeing ourselves differently? How might we use photography to look at the things or the creatures or the places in our lives that are significant to us and see them in new ways so that they become reflections of who we are, so we come to deeper understanding of who we are through them? And ultimately, how does photography reveal images of God to us in new ways? How do we begin to see God in more and more places? And what are the symbols in the world that really speak to us of this divine opening? For me, I'm always drawn to gates and thresholds and windows and doorways, and sort of this sense of being called to step across the threshold to this new sense of awareness. And so, since our focus for this webinar is really on, how to bring this to our parish life, how to bring this to our communities, I'd suggest that you consider creating some contemplative photography circles in your parish. And so these might be weekly or monthly meetings, twice monthly, sort of depending on your needs. And it could be an ongoing group that meets all year long, or it could be for a specific liturgical season. I find people are really drawn to creative practices for, say, Advent or Lent and gathering together in community. And you could draw themes either from the book, the Eyes of the Heart book that I have, the themes that I just went over. You could also draw inspiration from the liturgical seasons and the Sunday readings. And so bringing one of the readings, doing a Lectio Divina practice together, and then having some time to go look for images that reflect whatever that essence of that reading is. Coming out of this practice, either of Lectio or maybe even of centering prayer. Perhaps you already have groups that practice Lectio or centering prayer together in your parish, and so maybe photography is a way to kind of add to that, enhance that. And so if you gather a circle together, just a suggested way to do that, first is to have a facilitator, someone who helps to create the sacred space, to set the environment. There's a lot about the intention of holding that sacred space and lighting a candle and having symbols that are important for the time, and keeping time and keep honoring people's commitments. Gathering together for the time together, and it could be a small group, it could be a larger group, but beginning with a time of meditation and centering together. And this, I feel like, is one of the most important parts, is really having this time to slow down once we arrive in the group, to connect to our breath, to become fully present. Maybe doing a Visio Divina practice with the group like I led you through, with an image, maybe with an icon. And then having a time, if you have the kind of facility to do this, having a time to go out, maybe for half an hour, and receive images. And remember that, so photography, again, isn't about going to the most beautiful place and just doing this on a beautiful vacation. It's about doing this right where we are. And so even if your parish is in a location that doesn't feel especially aesthetic, that's the point of this practice, is to bring this sense of reverence and awakening to the everyday world right around us. And so having this time to go out and receive images so that people are in this reflective space together, and being reminded of seeing with the eyes of the heart, of receiving images rather than taking them. And then sharing the process with one another, coming back after this time of photographic exploration and sharing the process with one another. What did you notice? What did you experience and discover? What surprised you out of this time? If it's an especially large group, you could do that. You could break up into smaller groups, or you could break up into pairs and have people share that. And then at the end, maybe have people share one actual image with the group, just pass their camera around. And again, not the most beautiful image, but the image that stirred something really deeply for them, maybe something they don't even quite understand yet, but to create space for that. And then to have a time of closing prayer. And then another suggestion is, if meeting together in a physical space feels untenable, then I'm a big fan of the online world and the way that that can really open up creative expression for people. And so creating, for example, a monthly Flickr group with a given theme. And so at my website, abbeythearts.com, every month I host what I call a photo party. and I decide on a theme, and I invite people to share their images in response to that theme. And it's a beautiful way to gather together with others in this virtual space and share this sense of reverence for the gift of what we discover in the world around us. And then you could post that to your parish bulletin or your website. Asking people also to post a limited number of images, I think, is important because there's a discernment process that happens. This sense of I get to choose like which images really sort of spoke to me the most strongly, and to share a few words about the process of receiving them. So not just posting the images, but actually sharing a little bit about what it is they noticed, what it is they discovered. And then you could also you could create themes out of, again, liturgical seasons or out of themes from the book. Or I sort of basically come up with themes that are often seasonally tied or inspired by something that I happen to be pondering that given week. And this is just an image. This is actually a photo party that's going on right now this week, and our theme is landscape mysticism. And so I was reflecting on this idea of how landscapes that we live in and the landscapes we are drawn to shape us and form our spirituality. And so I invited people to share their own images of landscapes that were meaningful to them. And so you kind of have a sense of how amazing that is to share in that, and particularly this global community. You get to see images from all over the world. So I think I'm going to stop there, Jared, and turn it back to you for questions.
That sounds great. Yeah, we have some questions coming in already, so well timed. Take controls back over here. And yeah, so if you'd like to ask questions, go ahead and find that section in your GoToWebinar panel and type them into Christine, and I'll pick and choose a few and offer them up for a discussion here. First of all, Christine, thank you so much for that presentation. That was really excellent and eye-opening for me. To be cliche, that's great though. It really was impressive, and I thank you for that meditation. That was great to experience, and I think a lot of people were very attentive during that time. So we have one question coming in about photos and digital editing. Can you think of anything to say about, or maybe you put this in the book, I'm not sure, the contemplative process in digital editing or editing of photography? I'm guessing editing of photos.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's certainly different schools of thought around whether the image should stay in its sort of untouched form. I'm actually a fan of digital editing because I find there's a whole other process that happens for me. If there's an image that's really, really speaking to me and really shimmering for me, I find if I play with it a little bit and I crop it in different ways, so I play with that idea of framing and I maybe increase the contrast to sort of see how the shadow and light plays, I think all of it can be part of our contemplative practice. But I also think that it's good just to pay attention to what your motivation is. Are you editing because you're trying to make the most beautiful photo, which is okay, but that's a different purpose and a different practice altogether than what we're doing, which is really just trying to pay attention to like how this image is speaking to us and what we're receiving out of it. So I would say I think digital editing can be its own form of prayer.
Good, great. Jose asks, how could photography be used in catechesis with children and youth?
Well, I think what I was describing in terms of having contemplative photography circles. I mean, children and youth often have I had a camera when I was really little, and now of course teens have the smartphones and they have cameras in their phones all the time, and so to cultivate that kind of awareness of this thing that they're already doing, that's already a really important way of them engaging with their everyday lives and recording what's important to them, to give them the same tools. I mean, all the practices that I described can be used with people of any age, really. I mean, you would adapt the language a little bit depending on how young people were, but I would definitely encourage that cultivating this sense of contemplative presence, slowing down, noticing what are the images that are really calling to me, noticing how the images are breaking something open in me. And so, yeah.
I love that. I think there's so many apps out there that whether it's
Yeah.
Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram, kids are just really into the photography thing, and this is
Yeah,
a
exactly,
great way
exactly.
to kind of be counterintuitive.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly.
Okay, so I'm going to read the question from Jason. He says, how do you encourage photo receivers, I like that, photo
Mm-hmm.
receivers, how do you encourage photo receivers to get beyond it's a good, bad photo judgments of their own photos to allow the image to be a channel of grace?
That's a beautiful way to put it. I say it takes a lot of practice, and I think it's a lifelong practice. So the first thing I'll say is in Benedictine tradition, there's this commitment to conversion. So this recognition that we're always, always on the journey, and that we're always in process of becoming this channel of grace, more and more so. And so I would say that to remember that it's a practice, to remember that when we're engaged in this contemplative photography practice, that the awareness of what's happening in our own thoughts, like that is key to the meditation practice. It's very much what the desert monks taught us, was to become aware of the thoughts that come up in our daily lives, and meditation just gives us a chance to be aware of it. So as I'm receiving these images, if I start to feel like I'm either making judgments about whether this is a good photo or a bad photo, or I'm feeling kind of grasping, like I know there are times that I go out for a walk and maybe I've forgotten my camera and I really wish I could like capture the moment rather than just enjoy it. And all of those things are exactly the awareness that we're trying to cultivate in our photography practice. So it's not that it's bad that you had this judgment that I wanted a photo that was more beautiful or whatever that is. What's important is that you are aware that you had that experience, that you had that noticing, and then to see, like, is that really what I'm longing for in this experience? Is that really what I want? And so it's like this sense of awareness and awakening to what our minds are really doing. Like that is the core of it. So it's not that we ever get rid of this good, bad, beautiful, ugly kind of thing. It's a practice. And then we'll discover there'll be times when we are completely lost in the process of what we're doing and so entranced by it that the division between ugly and beautiful sort of disappears and we become those channels of grace. So
I'm going to pause for just a second. Can you talk a little bit about how, I know we're focusing on photography here, but what about other artistic expressions? There's obvious connections here, but can you just shed some light on that a little bit? Goes back to your other book,
sure.
I think, but.
Sure. So as I mentioned before, my training is in expressive arts, and actually one of the key things about expressive arts, in addition to the focus on process, is an emphasis on moving from one modality or art form to another. And so, like, I might take a photo, receive a photo, see, I just even used the language myself, receive the photo, and then write a poem out of it, and then maybe move from that. And so, and the idea of art as meditation is that I bring this awareness of the process to everything that I do. So the art making becomes a container of awareness so that I can become aware of the patterns of my own thoughts that basically keep me away from God. Like the thoughts, the judgments, the inner voices, the criticisms. I mean, that's for a lot of people that come to the workshops that I lead about particularly bringing arts to ministry work, that's what people wrestle with the most, is like this constant like inner judgment, inner voices, and they didn't even realize how loud that was until they allowed themselves to slow down and become aware of it. And it's in that awareness that we can start to break that cycle and soften towards ourselves and develop more compassion towards ourselves, which ultimately leads towards more compassion for others. So does that answer
No,
that
that's absolutely
question?
great. I think people are,
Yeah.
are kind of hinting around those kinds of questions that are kind of about that. So I want to explore it a little bit more. One person, Annie, asks about eyes of the heart, and I want to branch beyond just photography, but she says, can eyes of the heart also apply to professional photographer? And I wonder if you could talk about that, and then also, other forms of expressive art, whether it's painters or writers or whatever. How can these kinds of practices apply to their lives?
Well, that's also a great question. I would say certainly that the idea is that we cultivate this practice, this way of seeing, so that we bring it to everything we do. What I would suggest, though, is that when we're practicing, when we're trying to become more spacious seers, when we're trying to learn how to receive things rather than take them, that if we're professional photographers or professional artists, and we're doing that while we're also trying to create a beautiful image to sell, that isn't, I mean, it's not a bad thing to need to sell things and support ourselves. But in the time of our contemplative practice, when we're trying to develop this capacity, if we can do that and give ourselves permission, I think professional artists in particular need permission to have times when they're not focused on selling a product, when they just allow their own creativity to have kind of that freedom and that spaciousness and that play, really, so that yeah, so there's like a new freedom and there's a discovery that happens, like, of something deeper. And then you can bring those eyes of the heart to whatever you're doing. I mean, I think the eyes of the heart apply, in our daily lives, as we're walking down the street and encountering other people and having interactions and going to the bank and the grocery store and all of that. Like, ultimately, we want to bring that kind of reverence to the world.
That was great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Kind of goes again, touching on what you were speaking about earlier. Dorothea says, I was trying to get an artist group together in our church for Lent, but people seem to be intimidated. How do you invite people or convince people to join in the creative process?
Hmm. I think it takes a lot of education and gentleness. And by education, I mean in using language that really does focus on process over product, focuses on letting this be a journey of discovery, framing it as art as meditation. It takes, for a lot of people, there's a lot of wounding around art and art making, and we've shut part of ourselves down because we were told by someone at some point that we didn't have what it takes, or whatever the messages were. We all get those messages about all kinds of things in our lives. And so I think it takes, education, maybe speaking to the parish about, an experience of this kind of discovery through creation, like talking about my own practice of making art and how I grow closer to God through that, not because I'm making something beautiful, but because I'm crafting and I'm collaborating and I'm discovering, how this creative energy is moving through me. So I think it just takes a lot of education and attention to language and gentleness, just real gentleness with people.
Hmm. Great. I love. There's a question from a man named John, and I love what he's getting at. He says, in sharing images in a group, I can imagine it would be easy to share an image in order to receive praise from people. So there's that false self coming,
Yes.
rather than to share a blessing. Can you shed some light on that? And maybe he's asking you for some ways maybe we can avoid that or guide people in our group to focus more on sharing blessing, as he says.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the process again. It's a great awareness. So even in the sharing of our images, as you invite people to share images with one another, to just remind them, like, what is the image that most spoke to you? And just notice if you're drawn to share the image that you think is the most beautiful, or the one that you want to receive praise for. And it's okay if you do that. like, it's okay if you make that choice, but as long as you're aware of what you're doing and the motivation behind doing it, because that'll be the key towards the slow process of transformation. And so this sort of reminding people of the purpose of what's happening creates a safe space. I guess sort of answering the previous question as well, like safety too is key, and that's something I always emphasize in groups that I work with, is creating safety and like a space that's really free of judgment. And that's a hard thing to do because we're all filled with judgment. But those gentle reminders again and again, and just asking people to be really conscious and aware of their own motivations. I mean, that's all you can really do.
Okay, so Linda is asking about tools, and she says, what tools do you recommend if you want to gather photos and integrate them into the prayer experience? Maybe she's asking about what kind of camera or that sort of thing. I guess.
So is it like practical tools or?
Yeah, I'm assuming. Yeah, and I'm curious to know is that as well. Is it, if a lot of people have phones in their pockets, but would you suggest maybe a better camera to take a better, not take, see, I'm using the same language, but to receive an image and kind of capture its fullness with a better camera, or what do you suggest for people?
I think that the best camera is the one that you have with you. And so if it's, I think actually simple is better. I have a couple of more expensive fancy cameras, and I have a lens that I really love. It's like a telephoto lens. But the camera that I carry all the time is just a simple little Canon point and shoot. And I love that camera because it's always in my purse and it fits in there. And and actually those simple cameras, even the ones on your phone these days, have enough memory that they can create pretty good quality images. And again, remembering that the purpose isn't to create a work of art in this practice. It's really just about engaging photography as a way of seeing differently. And so and the other thing I was thinking in terms of sort of incorporating images into prayer was another beautiful thing to do would be if you have a group that's gathering together and sharing their images, then to have like whether it's a Flickr group or something where people share those images online together and then create like a simple little photo meditation. I like to do those a lot where you use, I use like a Photoshop Elements program that creates a slideshow. You can do it in PowerPoint and create a slideshow of people's images and put it to music, and there's something, it creates like a sense of reverence again around the images, and that's a beautiful way of honoring what people have created.
Well, Christine, we're almost out of time. I know a couple people have already asked, but can you share again where they can find you, connect with you, your website, and the book as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is Abbey of the Arts. That's ABBEY of the arts.com. And the book is Eyes of the Heart, Photography as a Christian Contemplative Practice. And I do offer online classes. There's one coming up next week that will be a large community of people gathered together to move through the book together over a 7-week period of time. I always recommend in the books that I write that people move through them both in groups and over long periods of time. They're not really meant to be just read in one sitting, but more practiced over time.
Well, thank you again very much. And as always, we always offer a promotion with our presenters, and here the same is the case. If you want to take advantage of a discount by attending this webinar or viewing the video recording, at least until next week, you can get 20% off if you use the promo code at avemariapress.com. The promo code is webinar423 for today's date, and that will expire next Tuesday.
Great. Thank you, Jared.
Thank you, Christine, very much for presenting with us today and for sharing your insights with us. And I think, like many people here, I'm going to use my phone to receive more images rather than take them.
Lovely.
So thank you very much. Before we actually go, I just want to make sure and thank our partners, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils, once again for their partnership. And if you're not familiar with them, please go check out their websites. If you're not already a friend or connected to Ave Maria Press online, please connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Vimeo, or the various social networking sites that are out there. And if you'd like to go to the webpage avemariapress.com/webinar-videos. All of our past webinar recordings are housed there online for you to review for free. Today's webinar recording will also be posted there later this week. So it's an excellent resource for teachers, catechists, and all people involved in parish ministry or seeking spiritual nourishment like this one. And finally, mark your calendars for our next webinar, which is next week. And we'll be joined with Pat Gone, the author of Blessed, Beautiful, and Bodacious, and Terry Polakovich, the executive director of Endow. And they will share 10 discussion starters about the feminine genius, particularly during this year of faith. So you can join us next Tuesday, April 30th at, once again, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So thank you everyone so much, and have a great afternoon. We'll see you next week.